Well, welcome everybody to today's podcast. I'm your host, Christian. I got Michael and Todd both here with me from Parkway, and we make up the business development team over at Parkway. And today we're going to be diving into a topic on hearing loops. But before we dive into that, Michael, Todd, how you guys doing, man? How you guys holding up with all this COVID, man?
Yeah, we're going. Yeah. Crazy.
Stir crazy. A bit.
I started
get outside when you can.
Yeah. I loaded up the family and went for a drive yesterday.
A drive to nowhere?
No, we saw my parents. We broke the rules. Probably shouldn't say that publicly, but
I hope Gretchen's not listening.
No, sorry, Gretchen.
Yeah, man. We went for a 2-mile walk yesterday together because it's so beautiful. I mean, it's gorgeous.
Yeah.
Weather's coming around. That helps.
That really does
a little bit when you can get outside. So I'm
gonna start working.
Yeah, I mean, we just
patio,
the whole stay-at-home thing. Obviously, here in Michigan, got advanced a few weeks, which was quite disappointing. But I mean, you get it. I keep telling people I don't like everything that's going on, but I certainly would not want to be the person making the decisions either.
Mm-hmm. That's hard, man.
Tough deal.
I was a little frustrated when it came out, but
living in that tension, like we were talking about earlier, guys, is like, protecting lives, but also making sure the economy doesn't fall apart. So just trying to find the balance between those two is really tough, Not everybody, like we're over on the west side of Michigan, and honestly, we have it good. I mean, as far as cases of COVID goes, but if you're over
not as bad over here.
We probably have a different perspective, right? So it's hard to be sensitive to things that you just don't know. And well,
so I did find out that I think in an earlier podcast we had, maybe one of our first ones, I mentioned a guy from our tech team that contracted COVID-19, and I actually texted with him the other day. He is planned to be leaving the hospital Wednesday. So he's doing
awesome.
Well.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, man.
It is very good.
Wow, that's been a long process because that was a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
Where you mentioned
he's been in for 3 weeks, I think. I think he was on a ventilator for like 4 days. So
wow.
Yeah, it puts it all in perspective, I mean, you can't get too frustrated. I was getting real frustrated the other day, and then my daughter, just out of the blue, sends me this picture. She works at a hospital in and around the Chicagoland area, and she basically said, "Dad, just chill out," because I was kind of getting a little aggressive,
a little grumpy.
She says, "Keep everything in perspective, Dad."
Yeah,
aren't kids wonderful?
Yeah, they are.
Your kids aren't old enough to tell you stuff like that.
Not yet.
They get in trouble.
Yeah. Shut your mouth.
Don't talk back to me.
Mine are. Mine can. Yeah. Mine have turned it around now. They can help me sometimes. So, anyway.
Well, especially when we're isolated, though, Ty. Like that brings up a great point. Like when we're isolated the way we are, and we're just kind of in our own mind, in our own world, very easily we can get into these places where we're just grumpy, we're just kind of irritated and believing the worst really is what it comes down to. And when we get around other people and we don't feel alone anymore, all of a sudden it brings us a little bit of life. And I think that's important during this time, is to try to find that. And I really appreciate having this time with you guys because it makes me feel like, hey, I'm interacting with adults outside of my house. And so it makes me feel a little bit more kind of normal. I don't know.
I miss church, man.
Yeah, I miss church.
Just having a cup of coffee after church and just chatting with folks, man. I never thought I'd miss that. You know what I mean? But maybe it's just a whole people thing anyway. Yeah. Or just sitting in the office,
Yeah.
Us three having coffee, doing nothing. Now we sit at home and have coffee and do nothing. Actually, don't tell our boss that.
Yeah.
We're working hard.
Yeah.
Anyway, we better get rolling here. We're going to run out of tape.
Well, yeah, today we're talking about hearing loops, and we got the expert on hearing loops here with us today, Todd Billen. Well, Todd, why don't you dive into a little bit about hearing loops, what hearing loops are? I'm sure there's going to be a part of our listeners who are familiar with it. And then there's going to be part of our listeners and audience who are not so familiar with it. And it's But even those who are familiar with it, they may only know it in a certain context. They don't know all the context that hearing loops exist in and for. And I would love for you to just be able to break down that for us today on today's podcast. So why don't you just start with a little bit of history on what hearing loops are and kind of go from there.
All right. So, yeah, I mean, you guys know my background. I've been an audio guy forever, and somewhere about, I don't know, there goes my chair again. I just told these guys I broke my chair.
Broke his chair.
Before we started, now my thing keeps falling apart. Anyway, so I'm going to say close to 15, 18 years ago. So I was selling church audio. I was in the church audio business for a long time. Still am, but not as much as Michael and Christian are. But the company I worked for and later owned was a company founded by my dad called ASCOM. That's now part of Parkway. Anyway, hearing assistance to me was always that $1,500 transmitter, FM transmitter that you just added on to every quote you did. I mean, that's the way I looked at it. Paid no attention to it. Just, well, this is what churches do. They get this little FM transmitter, and then people have these little body packs, they wear them, and then they can hear if they can't hear so well, blah, 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 blah. Never really thought about it, never EQ'd it, never listened to it. You just kind of threw it into every deal. That's pretty much what I thought about it. I got introduced to a gentleman by the name of Dr. David Myers, who is a professor at Hope College, and he had come across.
I think I lost you there, Todd.
I lost him too.
Yeah, we lost you. You sounded perfectly amazing, and then we just lost your feed.
How about now?
Yeah, we got you now, baby. There it is.
Sorry about that.
So I'll be able to edit that a little bit shorter. So why don't you just go ahead
and...
Yeah, Dr. Myers.
I must have bumped my microphone. Sorry, guys. Anyway, Dr. David Myers, who's a professor at Hope College, and he came up with a new concept, and he didn't come up with it. He found it. So actually, inductive loop hearing assistance is a practice very well known in Europe, in Scandinavian countries. It was not anything that's really commonplace here in the United States. Here in the United States, we use primarily FM in a lot of churches, which, like I said, is a little FM radio transmitter and a little FM radio you wear with little headphones or earbuds or something over your head, and you can walk around church and listen to the service because you can't hear so well. So anyway, or IR, which is a infrared technology that was used in a lot of movie theaters. Just about every movie theater had it, but no one ever used inductive looping. Dr. David Myers introduced me to the concept, and I'm not going to go into his whole story. He's got an amazing story. He has a website also. I'll throw that out right now, which is hearingloop.org. That's hearingloop.org. And he'll tell you his background, and he's got a whole bunch of really good stats and stuff on there too. But he introduced me to inductive loop hearing. I was not a big fan of it. I thought, why spend all this money for a handful of people in church, that can't hear quite so well? I was always concerned about what was coming out of the speaker. But I got to know a lot of people who were hearing impaired, and I really didn't understand how widespread it really was. So we kind of started down this path, and about 2 or 3 years after we did our first couple of loops, we actually started a whole division within our company called Hearing Loop Systems. And at that time, and probably still today, we're the largest provider of loop technology in the United States. So that's bloomed into thousands of installs in churches. We do airports around the country. We do arenas. We do movie theaters. We do meeting halls. We do corporate boardrooms. We put this technology everywhere, and it's growing quite rapidly. So a technology that's been around but never used much here in the United States has now become, like in West Michigan here, every church that I know of that puts in some kind of a hearing assistance product is looking first at inductive looping. It's very commonplace here in West Michigan. It's beginning to spread around the country. So if you don't know what it is, you can go to David Myers' site, You can go to our site, which is hearingloopsystems.com. Is another place to find more stuff about it, or get a hold of myself, Christian, or Michael, and we can walk you through it as well. So to talk a little bit about it, I actually have a few slides. I can pull them up now. But before I do that, I thought I'd show you a couple of things. This is and we'll get into how this works. I got a few slides that'll go into it. But this is a modern, what we call a BTE, behind the ear hearing aid. And basically this piece here sits behind your ear. There's a little fiber optic cable that comes down here into an earpiece. And built into this device, and in most, this is the most common hearing aid that's used out there because it does the best job of helping people who can't hear. The BTE, there are other ones, little tiny ones that go way down in your ear canal that you can't hardly see. They work, but they don't work that well. This is the most common. This has a device called a T-coil. We'll talk about it later, but it also has a microphone on it. This really is a sound system. Inside this, there's a microphone. Inside here, there's a little processor, digital processor inside there, and there's a speaker. So here it is, a little tiny sound system all in one, and it amplifies sounds and help people hear. So anyway, so let me.
So Todd, can you expand on that? Your hearing aid, are you able to dial that in and EQ it with that DSP in there?
Yeah. So audiologists, that's what they do. An audiologist, if you've never been, I'd recommend anyone go if you're feeling like you're having problems. The interesting thing, which brought up another point. Anyway, let me answer your question first, Michael. Audiologists, this is where you go, and they actually do a hearing test where they'll bring you into a small anechoic chamber, read some things to you, different things to check your hearing, tones, left ear, right ear. They go through this whole process of checking your hearing, and then that prints off on a graph that shows you where your actual loss is, depending on the frequencies you're picking up and not picking up. And then they tune this. It's got a DSP in it, some better than others, just like all DSPs, right? Some are better than others, some do more than others. And then they tune this to your specific hearing loss. So I'll be honest and tell you that I had mine checked a few years ago, and Michael was there with me and knows that I have a small dip in my hearing at 4K, but at 57 years old, it's not that bad. I got a little dip at 4K, right. A very good low frequency response. Nice. So don't ever tell me I can't hear your subs, because I can't.
Well, I think this is probably a good point to interject that if you are a working audio engineer, either voluntary or paid professional, I think it's highly important to get your hearing checked, just to know where your ears are at, because even if you have a tiny bit of loss, it may explain some things in your mix, right, and help you to compensate for that. And I, as a professional audio engineer, I was doing it about every 3 years. It's kind of when I was getting my ears checked. And thankfully, this last time, my hearing's still pretty good.
No, it's perfect. I can attest to that. I was sitting right next to him. It's like she shows me it's an audiogram, right? Isn't that what they call it? I'm sorry to all my audiologist friends. I should know this, but it's an audiogram, just a graph, shows a plot. And I'm looking at mine. I'm looking at Michael's. I'm like, oh, man. I got this dip here. I got a little roll off on the high frequency. His is like better than perfect. So, but no, you make a great point. Everyone should. And the funny thing about, talk just briefly, and then I'll get into my slides, but let's just have an honest conversation about hearing loss. It's like the butt of a lot of jokes. Let's just be honest. Grandpa can't hear anything. Someone check his hearing aid, you know? But when you really think about it, I'm sitting here looking at all three of us, and what do we have on our head? What's common to all of us?
We got headphones.
What else?
And these things. And glasses.
Yeah. What's the difference between not being able to see and not being able to hear? The funny thing is these have become a fashion statement, right? Wearing glasses is like there's all different styles and everything else, but yet hearing loss, I call it like the hidden disease, and it's the butt of a lot of jokes. What's the difference? It's you get these to help yourself see, and you get something like this to help yourself hear.
Right.
I believe someday these are going to become a fashion statement, and if we really think about it, people are walking around with stuff in their ears a lot. And there are other ways to get something to happen that doesn't have to look like this either.
We need Beats hearing aids.
There's a lot of talk about things like that coming out, but it is like the invisible disease. And when you understand some of the things that does to you in your life as your hearing gets worse and worse and worse, there's a lot of studies, and we won't have the time to go into all this, but trust me, I have learned more about hearing loss than I would ever want to admit over the last 10 or 15 years. I've spoke at conferences. I've met with a lot of audiologists. I know the community. HLAA, the Hearing Loss Association of America, is probably the largest organization of people that advocate for people with hearing loss. So that's a good one to check out too. HLAA.org is a great website to find resources on, but it's a serious thing.
Before we move on, Todd, it's such a great point you make, just talking about hearing loss in general. It's like, how does the quality of somebody's life get affected when they can't hear well, right? Whether it's at church, which happens a lot, but then talking practically, when you go shopping, when you go to a ticket booth, when you go to the movie theater, everywhere you go, if you can't hear, all of a sudden you are in a minority. And they don't always cater to that. And so what I love about hearing loops is that it actually brings them back into the fold to where your quality of life or your experience of things goes back to normal. Like it's normative again, right?
So I remember one of the first loops I put in, a good point to that was and we'll get into this in some of my slides, but one of the biggest problems people who have loss of hearing, the places they can't hear the worst or the hardest places for them to hear is in large rooms that have a lot of reverberation and also in noisy places. So restaurants, airports, any place where there's a lot of background noise, they have a very difficult time carrying on just a normal conversation. But churches is one of those. So one of the first loops I ever put in was in a Catholic church in Grand Rapids. This is, like I said, 18 years ago. We weren't that good at it, but we got one to work. We're early adopters, if you know what I mean. We got one to work correctly, and it's not the easiest thing in the world either. There's more to it than just, we have a dedicated loop amp engineer at Parkway that's all they do is engineer loops. So it's not like, it's like saying installing speakers is easy, right? There's a lot to it. Same thing as with loops. But anyway, we got this one in. And I went there for their dedication. They had a little dedication, and the father, after mass was done, just said, "Hey, there's a gentleman here from the Hearing Loop Company. If you have any questions for him," he wanted to stick around, and I did. And a couple people asked me about it, but at the end of it, I had one little old lady. I don't know how old she was, but she came walking up to me, and she said to me, she says, "I got to tell you something." She says, "I have been coming to this mass for 15 years. And today was the first time that I ever heard what the priest said." And I'm like, "What?" Wow. She says, "Yeah." She says, "I was hoping I was getting saved by just being here in the building, but I could never hear any of it. I would just,
oh my goodness.
And that'll change your perspective on some things." All of a sudden, there's another technology that I was very interested in other than just making stuff sound great through speakers. Because if you have hearing loss, I don't care how well your speaker system works, those people are not going to hear it. So anyway,
that's good.
So let me get into this little slide thing. It'll help us just kind of, if I can hopefully make this work. I'll do a couple of slides here.
There we go.
All right. You guys got that?
We got that.
Got it.
Got to start with a little humor, right? It's a portable hearing assistance system there.
Imagine carrying that.
The funny thing is yeah, it needs to have a back strap or something for it. I should have got the picture of the bottom. Maybe there's wheels on it. I don't know. Anyway, looking at this, though, the funny thing is that it's amazing actually how well this probably works if you think of it in played acoustical principles.
We all played the telephone game with a string in the can. It was very similar.
Well, if you think about what what they call those things, the old Victrolas. It's just the reverse of a loudspeaker. It's got a very large, big collector that collects a lot of sound, and it probably worked quite well.
We'll be giving one of these away on Facebook.
Yeah,
if you want to sign up,
sign up now.
Delivery not included.
That's right.
So let's talk about hearing aids, let's talk about loop technology. So here are a few statistics just to prove my point. If you go to the HLAA website, one of the first things you'll see in statistics there is that according to the National Center for Health Statistics, 36 million, almost 17% of people have some level of hearing loss. Now, that may not sound like a lot, but when you compare it to other health issues, it's third behind heart disease and arthritis. Wow. So it's a big deal. A third of those over age 65 have hearing loss. 65% of those with hearing loss are below retirement age.
Wow.
So I guess I would fit into that category. And believe it or not, 1 in 5 teens have hearing loss. I knew that when I had a teen.
Really?
Because everything listened to you? Or?
There's hearing loss, or there's just not wanting to listen. I'm not sure which one.
Well, my 8-year-old has had a problem with ear tubes, like getting inflamed in the back, and just this past week he developed an ear infection, and he told us he couldn't hear out of that ear at all.
Oh, wow.
And that's very common. When people have tubes when they're young. So I should go over a whole thing on how. One of these days we should go over how the ear actually works, which is a whole nother conversation, because, when you go to school, they teach you how to see, you're taught so much about all your other senses, but you don't get taught much about hearing. Most people don't really know how sound works. It sounds like a good topic for another discussion.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Sure.
It has a lot to do with how the ear works, but just some more statistics here. You probably read them by now, but the last one there, 95% of hearing aid owners say their number one need is to improve speech intelligibility in high noise areas. Okay. So if you understand how that hearing aid works, all it does is amplify sounds. A microphone does not know which sound to amplify. So if you put a microphone in the middle of a very noisy place, what's it amplifying?
Everything.
So it amplifies the background noise. It amplifies the sound that you want to hear. And by the way, here's something that I want you to listen to this. If anyone ever tells you any different, they're selling you snake oil. Okay. Any good audiologist, and to be honest with you, there's a few good ones and there's a lot of not so good ones. Okay. But a hearing aid only works as good as someone you can shake hands with. Okay. A hearing aid was never designed to work in a church when you've got a loudspeaker 60 feet away from you.
Sure.
Okay. That's not what they're designed for. They're designed for conversation, and they're only going to pick up sounds where you can shake hands with. So there's a lot of statements. I run into a lot of other audiologists or / snake oil salesmen that will tell you the hearing aid will absolutely, completely change your life, and it can, but it's got to be in the right situation. They don't work everywhere. They're just for things that are close to you because of the fact that they amplify everything.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
So really, the question is, can you hear? Or better said, can you understand? Now, only an audio guy knows the difference between those two, okay? Because a lot of times you can hear, all right? But when you ask somebody, can you hear? Like if you're in a church and someone comes up to you after the service, Michael or Christian, and says, hey, I couldn't hear. A lot of the audio guys will go, well, I got to turn it up louder. Right? But what happens when you just turn it up louder in a noisy room? It's more reverberation.
More reverberation.
Yeah. Volume does not necessarily constitute being able to hear. Okay. With hearing loss comes a compensation problem. loss in compensation or understanding what someone is saying. So it's not just your ear, it's also a brain function. To better explain this, it's like looking at a book and you can see the words with your eyes, but you don't understand. You don't understand what they mean when they're put together. The brain does the same thing when you're having trouble with hearing. You can hear it, but you just can't put it all together. In a room, even with a good sound system in a reverberant room, I've had this before. I don't know if you guys have run into this, but when we're past the music and everything else, and the pastor's just giving his message, if people sit in that auditorium and they're having a difficult time, let's just talk in a normal hearing person, someone with good hearing, but because of the reverberation, the bad audio system, whatever it is, your mind is spinning like crazy trying to understand what's being said. You'll walk out of that service feeling just like
you're completely drained.
Exactly.
Yeah. Fatigued,
literally fatigued, ear and mental fatigue. And you don't even know what's happening. People don't know this is going on. Well, that's what happens when someone begins to lose their hearing or their ability to understand what somebody's saying. You're constantly working at it, and it becomes very difficult. So it's difficult to single in on a single source. A lot of people who have hearing loss will tell you one of their most difficult places is in a restaurant. You're sitting at a table with 3-4 friends. There's a lot of background noise. You can't hear the people at the table, and you tend to just check out of the conversation because you can't hear it, right? And we already touched on the last one there, that a hearing aid amplifies sound of the surrounding environment, but does not help with the speech discrimination. Now, there are hearing aids that do better than others. Believe it or not, they use the DSP in these hearing aids that they can actually turn them into focusing microphones through different technology. We know how that works, right? We can make it look a mini shotgun or a wide or cut stuff to the back. Some of these have that technology built in them. It's kind of cool. So we talked a little bit about this hearing aid compliant assistance technology, what's out there. There's really 3 that are recognized by the ADA, the American Disabilities Act. If you go in there and you look at the article on hearing loss, it basically tells you that every public facility must provide one of these 3 systems: hearing loops, FM, or infrared. Now, we all know that doesn't always happen. And this is a whole other subject I could go off on, but someone would never put a building in without a handicap access, right? The local inspector would not allow you to do that, but you'd be surprised, even though this is in the ADA, that it's still not done, that there's not hearing assistance technology available. Bluetooth is a whole nother subject. It's a great technology. It's not recognized by the ADA. It is a newer technology, and that's not why it's not recognized, but it's great for one-to-one pairing.
Yeah.
That's what Bluetooth's good for. Short range, one-to-one, kind of a private network kind of thing, if you will. But using that to connect 1,000 people in a sanctuary, 1,000 people can't pair to one Bluetooth device. It doesn't work that way. It's one-to-one. So I get asked that question a lot, so I want to make sure I covered it. However, when I require hearing aids, my hearing aid will have Bluetooth built into it because I want to be able to pair it to my phone or my TV or something.
No, you can have both, can't you?
Absolutely.
T-coil and the Bluetooth?
You certainly can. And that's why mine will have it. So let's talk about a loop. What is a loop? So a loop basically is an amplifier. You'll see there. I don't know if can you see my mouse? Christian? Okay. Yep. So there's an amplifier, and this is just a simple thing. There's a loop of wire that goes around a seating area here. There's a sound from the talker here into a microphone that goes into the amplifier and then is amplified through this loop of wire. And there's a T-coil. That hearing aid I show you, here's a blow up of a hearing aid, and inside there's a little coil. And that coil is what picks up that magnetic, we'll talk about the magnetic field, but it'll pick up that audio field and then transmit that into the speaker of the hearing aid.
That's awesome. For our musician friends, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is very similar to a single coil pickup in a guitar.
Yep. Very similar. Actually, inductive technology I have been told, I shouldn't bring this up because I'm not completely sure, but when you pull up to a traffic signal and there's automation in the light to tell it to turn green or red, on these intersections where there's not a lot of traffic, there's a loop actually that's cut into the pavement.
Really?
And that's what activates a signal.
Oh, no kidding.
Because it'll sense that a car's sitting on it, because it senses a change in the current, because now there's something metal sitting on top of that magnetic field.
Oh, that's interesting. Anyway, that's cool to know.
It's not a new technology, but
right.
So here we have a loop amplifier. We got a loop of wire. Sound is amplified in that amplifier. Drives it through that continuous loops of wire that creates a magnetic field. Those are the rings I'm showing you. That's going around that, creating a magnetic field. And when the T-coil in a hearing aid intersects that magnetic field, it picks up the audio that's traveling on the magnetic field. So that's really how it works. People always ask me, well, what is a loop system? Is it like a frequency? Is it it's not. It's magnetic fields. And we can manipulate those magnetic fields in a lot of ways that we manipulate audio fields. That's why there's a lot more to it than what meets the eye. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of things we can do with that. Magnetic fields are really quite interesting when you compare them to audio fields. They look a lot the same. They react to kind of the same. They do things, we talk, when two sound waves hit each other, they cancel each other, right? We all know this. And when two magnetic fields of opposing plus or minus hit each other, they attract or disattract as well, right? Mm-hmm. We all know that. There's your mother's refrigerator with all your cute little magnets all over them. And we all know, we learned this back in elementary school, that two south poles of a magnetic field push each other away, and a north and a south attract. So if we use that technology when we're manipulating magnetic fields, we can get them to do things that we want them to do. Right?
Yep.
But not all loops are created equal. So that simple example I showed you of just one wire around a room is not the way they all work. There's all different kinds of loops, and they're all used for all different kinds of purposes. You got perimeter loops, which is kind of what I showed you. There's phased array loops. There's single turn, multi-turn, low spill, cancellation loops. And there's all different types of amplifier types and output power. So what I'm not going to teach everyone about exactly how to engineer a loop today, but what you need to understand is it's not a one size fits all. So we've been so used to buying technology, hearing assistance technology, which is a box that you plug into your mixer like an FM transmitter, and just sends it all out, and there's nothing to worry about. Loops are more like designing a loudspeaker system for a room, because not every room's the same. Well, loops are the same way. They have to be designed properly into that room. So don't just call me and say, hey, I got a 20,000 square foot facility. How much is my loop? Well, there's a lot more to it than that. There's just a whole bunch of engineering that needs to go into it to do it correctly. Now, if you don't want to do it correctly, just throw a wire around your room and good luck. So here's some of the differences, just to kind of cover a few. There's two examples. You see a seating area here. This is what looks like to be a fairly typical church. Maybe this is a choir loft over here, I'm guessing. I don't even know what project this is. But in a perimeter loop, because the magnetic fields are circular around the wires, you can only get those wires so far apart. Because as the wires get farther and farther apart, you get a dip in the middle of the magnetic field. Magnetic fields don't carry forever. And like audio, the farther you get away from the source, they drop in level. We can literally measure this, right? And that's how they work. So if you have metal in your building, which a lot of buildings do, if you've got re-rod and concrete, metal and magnets don't go together. It's like putting a sponge in a bucket of water. That sponge soaks up the water. Well, metal in a magnetic field tends to pull, suck that magnetic field up. So there's other things that go into consideration. So we came up with this way of doing phased array loops, which is the one on the right. The red indicates one loop field and the blue indicates another and we literally stack them over top of each other going through here to create an even SPL. So when you're designing loop systems, it's just like audio. We don't put a speaker in the front 10 feet away from someone and expect the guy in the back 60 feet away to hear the same thing, right?
Right.
Right.
We're trying to create systems in our audio fields with loudspeakers that the industry standard is plus or minus 3 dB, right? So there's no more than a 6 dB swing across the entire seating area. That's kind of an industry standard. Well, we do the same thing with loops. And the way to do that is by creating these phased arrays.
That's cool.
So here's another example. This is actually a conference space with retractable walls, right? In phased arrays, I won't get into it. We can actually limit how much spill happens through a wall because it's a magnetic field that can penetrate walls, not like acoustical energy, which tends to bounce off of it, right? Depending on the frequency, of course. We won't get too technical here. But this room can be one big room, or it can be 3 separate rooms. Actually, looks like it can be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rooms. These can be divided again. So what we've done here is we put phased array loops in, and those phased arrays, by putting a negative charged field against a positive one, we can limit how much spill if this air wall is in. Now, let me explain this. If I had 2 people having a presentation or doing a conference in here, I had a speaker in here, I got a talker in here and a talker in here. Let's say you're sitting in this room right here and your chair was right up against the wall and you turn your hearing aid T-coil on and all you could hear was this guy over here talking. You can't see him, but you can hear him because these magnetic fields can go outside. They penetrate through walls. So what we do is we put a low spill array in here that charges that field the opposite way, so it actually cancels the loop signal at the wall.
That's cool.
All right. So you hear when the walls are in, you only hear what's happening in your room. But when you open the walls up, now we don't want a dead spot right here, right? So now if my chair was here, the room was all one big room, I don't want to be sitting somewhere where I can't hear nothing. So we add a positive loop in there in this dashed line here that when the wall is open, it adds signal at the wall. So now it's nice and even when it's one big hall.
That's cool.
So
this is all done by magnetic fields. It's just manipulating them.
This can apply to a stage as well. Like earlier, we talked about the single coil pickups. And I've been in some churches where that hearing loop could possibly interfere with those instruments if the loop is not installed correctly.
Great point.
Yeah, I've had
something. We don't loop stages. We try to keep that signal away. And it's not just, I've had it, I'll be honest, I had it in my own church. I put a loop in my own church, and our worship leader who plays electric guitar happened to be standing right on the edge of the stage, and we had this funky looking sounding thing that he kept telling me. He says, man, it sounds like I got reverb going on my guitar. I'm like, dude, he says, but I got all my reverb off. There's nothing on. I'm playing this thing completely clean. And it finally dawned on me. I reached down, turned the loop amplifier off, and it went away. And it was actually creating. So the sound of his guitar was going through the loop back into
feedback.
The pickup coil. It's feedback, but it don't sound like feedback.
Right.
It actually sounded like reverb. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard the sound before.
And the other thing is microphones. Okay. Microphones have a moving coil. They have a magnetic field. A speaker is a magnetic field. So there's other things that we have to watch out here. Now, I don't want to alarm everybody. Don't say I can't put it in my church because I have a guitar. It's just putting the right loop system in that does it the right way. Right. We just keep it off of the stage.
So I want a preference that needs to be installed correctly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And understanding what you're doing.
Well, and to that point, I remember I went on one of my early days, maybe my first couple of weeks at Parkway. There was a client in a church that wanted Todd to go out and do a quote for a hearing loop system for their main worship space, and I went along with them. Sure enough, he's doing all tests in the room to be able to measure how wide the room is, how deep it is, and then how far apart everything needs to be, the loops need to be in order to provide the right amount of SPL, like you were saying, so it's distributed equally. And, it's science is what it comes down to. And that's what the team at Parkway does, is that they help you figure that out so that it works practically for you in the best way possible.
So a lot of the same things that brought up another thought of mine, Christian, on what you said is we had a discussion on an earlier podcast about how when you go live stream and you take that acoustical room out of the picture, right? We talked about this a few weeks ago on one of our earlier podcasts, how it's like putting the audio under a microscope, right? There's nowhere to hide. Everything, right. Every little thing that comes out, you hear, because you're not dealing with an acoustical room. Well, here's the same thing. We can get away with a plus or minus 6 dB swing in a room. And I'd say most people, because it's an acoustical environment, are not going to hear the difference.
Yeah.
You don't get away with a plus or minus, more than a plus or minus swing when someone's got something stuck right in their ear.
Right.
I mean, there's no hiding.
Right.
So I've been in churches that people have just thrown a loop around the perimeter, had no idea what they're doing. And you'd sit by the sidewall, where the loop wire was, and you'd hear fine. And the next week you come back to church and you go sit in the middle aisle and you couldn't hear. You're 15, 20 dB down.
Right.
Because the signal wasn't there. So one of the instances I had, this poor gentleman who, didn't understand audio, magnetic fields. He didn't understand anything. He just knew how to turn a little switch on his hearing aid and he could hear. But he'd go to church, sit in one spot, he'd hear fine. He'd go into another. He thought there was something wrong with his hearing aid. So he'd go back to his audiologist. The T-coil level in a hearing aid can be adjusted in that DSP. So he'd go back to his audiologist and say, my loop, my T-coil signal's not near high enough. So his audiologist would jack it up. And you can guess what he did the next week. He went and sat in that seat along the aisle on the outside.
Yeah, no, it's too high.
Right. And it was just blasting his head off. And then he'd go back and tell his audiologist, well, you got to turn down. It's too loud. He had no idea. Right. It was this back and forth thing. And when I finally met the guy and told him what was going on, he was like, oh my goodness, I've been going through this for 6 months. I'm like, well, it ain't your fault. It's an idiot who put your loop in, so we got him fixed up. So
cool.
Yeah.
So here's a couple just to kind of wrap things up a little bit here. We also, 10 years ago or something, I realized that one of the worst places in the world to hear is an airport. Not just any transportation facility, subway, bus, you name it. Okay. Transportation. And the funny thing is that these are public spaces, but yet somehow they skate the ADA requirements. You ever been to an airport and asked for a hearing assistance device? Try it once. They'll look at you like, huh?
Yeah. What's that?
What are you talking about? But FM and IR systems, because they require you to take to hand out some kind of a device to pick up the signal, would never work in an airport. Can you imagine handing out hundreds of hearing assistance devices when you come into the airport, and then have to give them back before you get on the plane? What a nightmare. But because a loop is a loop is a loop, it doesn't matter what building you put it in. They're not frequency dependent or anything. It works everywhere. So wherever you have a loop, you just turn the T-coil on your hearing aid. It doesn't matter what kind of facility it is. So we started putting these in airports. We've completed about 6 projects. Grand Rapids was the first one. As soon as you go through TSA, the whole rest of the airport is looped. And whenever I go through Grand Rapids, which is my home airport, and when I get to some of these others, I have that hearing aid showed you is actually mine. I carry them when I travel. And I'll guarantee you, even a person that can hear well, okay, even someone with good hearing, what can you hear in an airport with good hearing?
Right.
How much?
What is that noise that they're blasting in that overhead speaker, right? Half the time you're like, what did he say? What the heck?
It's the Peanuts teacher.
Yeah, exactly. That's about it. You can't hear it. There's too much background noise. You got these beautiful buildings. These airports are huge glass, speakers are 50 feet up in the air, reverberation all over. You got all this noise in the airport, right? You can't hear a lick. I tell you, I go to those airports that have loops in them, and I put my hearing aids in, turn on T-Coil, I can hear better than anybody in the airport, including you, Michael. With the perfect hearing, I can hear better than you because it's direct in my ear. It's coming right straight in. Right. There's no background noise. There's no nothing. So this is kind of what it looks like. This is actually, I think, Rochester International Airport, and we put phased array loops. These are through the gate areas and everything else.
And we recently did Phoenix. Was our newest
Phoenix, one? Yep.
Sky Harbor.
Yep. Doing a few of them there.
Really nice airport.
You would ask that. Now I've forgotten which. We're working on a ton of them. I know that Austin, Austin Airport has it. Kalamazoo.
When LA
do we do LA?
LAX. We've talked with LAX.
Yeah,
so
gotcha.
We've talked to most every airport. But it's I know Grand Rapids has got a new project coming out. We're going to be doing a bunch more there. So yeah, it's an amazing.
Point being, Parkway is nationwide. We will do projects if it makes sense for both parties.
Well, the other one that blew me away that you were telling me about, Todd, a couple months ago was, we're now beginning to install these at ticket booths. Like when people go to buy tickets to an event or something like that, now all of a sudden there's a hearing loop there and people can actually hear what's being said to them. That blew me away. I was like, whoa, that is an awesome application, because I'm sure that's pretty frustrating kind of area. There's a lot of people around you, a lot of reverberation. If you've ever been to a stadium getting tickets for a game or going to a concert, and it's just chaos, right? And you're just trying to buy your ticket and I can't hear you kind of thing.
Right.
So that's awesome that we're actually doing that.
Here's a funny, let me finish this last slide. So here's the point. I just want to make sure, and this is not that Parkway is the only company around that can do this, or hearing loop systems, our hearing loop systems division. 10 years ago, I would tell you that we were. There just wasn't many people that knew how to do this, but there's a lot of them around the country now that have learned and do a very good job with it. But the good thing is there are more companies installing loops. The bad thing is there are more companies installing loops. It's a new technology. It's not new, but knowing how to do it right is the key. So just do your research. We're not the only ones. We happen to be one of the biggest ones, the ones with the most experience, but just beware,
Yeah.
This is my favorite sign. I don't know where this is, but that's going to be me soon. Don't hit me. This is where we all want to be right now. Beware of falling coconuts. I want to know where that is.
I wouldn't mind that right now. Yeah. Actually, it's getting nice over here, so I'm not going to complain too much.
Right.
So just to kind of recap, I don't know if you guys got other comments. I know there was something I was going to say a minute ago, but
I have a question for you. Is from the diagrams, if I'm not familiar with loop systems and I'm thinking about it for my organization, for my building, it didn't really show like there was an amplifier, and then you showed like there's a wire going around. Where is that wire? How does that get installed? Is it underground? How does that work?
So the cost of a hearing loop system is 90% in the installation of the cable, and that's why they're more expensive than an RF or an IR. I mean, because there's a wire to install. With an RF, you plop the box on top of the console, plug it in, away you go. Right. So the installation of the wire, and I'd say 99% of the time, it's in the floor. We want to get it as close within 4 feet of the hearing aid, which is what picks it up. So that's where we want to get it, within 4 feet. So that typically means the floor. Now, in some instances, some of those airports actually they're in the drop ceiling. So we put in drop ceilings if it's not too far away. The farther you get away, the harder you got to drive the signal. So it's just more amplifiers. It's just an efficiency, just like it is in audio.
So if a customer has an existing building and they want to retrofit it and they have carpet, let's say, does that customer need to go worry about replacing the carpet, or how do we deal with that?
Certainly, if you're replacing your floor coverings, that's the perfect opportunity to do that. Okay, I will say that first and foremost. But just because you have carpeting doesn't mean you can't put it in. There are ways. We have a retrofit. So our favorite way to put in a loop is actually to cut it into the concrete. We come in with a a dry saw with a HEPA filter on it, suck up all the dust, and we cut a little groove in your concrete. It's maybe a 1/2 inch deep by a 1/4 inch wide, and then we lay a wire in there and just floor stone back over top of it. It's permanent. It's done. It's there. It's always going to be there. In retrofit applications, we actually have a flat wire. It looks like electrical tape, only it's made out of copper. You can pull the carpet back, cut it, pull it away from the wall, slap that flat wire down there, put the carpet back in place, and you've got yourself a loop. So,
and we organize that with carpet companies usually.
Yeah, our guys don't cut your carpet. Don't worry, we hire professionals.
Come back and fix that, and you'll never know the difference.
Right. Yeah. So when I was working over at Ridge Point, all their floors in their main auditorium were concrete, and so it was poured when they actually built the floor and put in the floor is when they put the hearing loop system in. And then over at Engedi is we've actually had to replace a couple of pieces, and so they had like the rip up carpet tiles, which made it a lot easier.
I remember doing that when I helped out on that one at Engedi. Yeah, that was all 2x2 or 1x1 carpet squares.
Yep,
so that's easy. You just pull the carpet squares up and lay the wire down and flop them back in place again. So,
right.
Yeah, the nice thing about getting it in the concrete is that it's always there. That floor tape, it works, but anytime you're going to replace the carpet or you got to pull up a carpet square or something like that, there's always a concern that you may hit the wire, nick the wire.
Yeah, it might rip.
Yeah, it's just wire. It's not a big deal to replace, but we like to get them embedded into concrete. So some of these airports will do during construction. So the wire is actually embedded in the concrete, which is underneath the terrazzo. Some airports, we actually put the wire in the concrete while they're pouring it.
That's cool.
So we can actually lay the wire down and they pour the concrete over top or around it.
And what about some of these older church buildings that have basements? Sometimes that's an option too, right? Like, hey, we don't have the money to replace our carpet right now, but we really need the, hearing loop system. And then that's also a creative way to do it, right?
Right. So if you understand, how magnetics work, concrete doesn't seem to affect a magnetic field a whole lot. And in the ways that it does, we can compensate for it. So that's the perfect scenario going into a church and they have this basement, lower level. We have a lot of those here in Michigan. Not everywhere else in the country has them, but you can actually put the wire in the ceiling of the lower level and it can work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, a modern building that may have a poured concrete floor and then there's that metal pan. If you've ever been on a construction site, they put that metal pan down and they pour the concrete under that. That's a little bit more challenging. That doesn't mean it can't be done. It's just a little bit more difficult. And that's where, so we come out, we look at all that, we figure all that out for you.
Yeah. So if you're looking to put new flooring into your facility, that is definitely the time to start having this conversation about possibly installing it at the time.
Substantially less money if you do it then.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks, Todd, for sharing that with us. Any final thoughts? Yeah. Any final questions or things that maybe our listeners want to know about hearing loops?
I could go on for hours, but I'll try not to. I just, just be aware. I think that's the key. There's a lot of, do a little research, go to HLAA, which is a great organization to read about the effects of hearing loss. And, we're not our parents. We're not our grandparents, our grandparents, my grandparents were accepting people. And let me explain that. When they got old, they just, that's the way it is. I'll just accept life the way it is. You know what I mean? Losing my hearing. Okay. We'll just we're not that way.
No.
We're the technology folks, man. Come on, fix this. There's a problem. You got to fix it. Give me something, right? And that's
America can come up with a solution.
I mean, we're planning on traveling until we're dead, right? We're getting on airplanes. We're going. Of course, COVID's done, but we're going to get out there. We're not going to sit around and wait to die. We got things to do, people to see. We expect results for things, and that's the way people are. And the fact of the matter is, we're going to lose our hearing. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why this technology really is, and really the biggest thing, people, if you know someone who is and who has experienced a loop, it's like listening to a good sound system and a bad one. You can tell, when you ask someone that's used a loop system, because they're in the control of the situation. They don't have to check out a body pack or some crazy thing they got to wear on their head. You got to remember, these people are paying $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 for these hearing aids.
Yeah.
When I stick this in my ear, okay, connected to an FM transmitter, what are these things? $15, maybe $10, right? Now, I got the expensive one. They're probably 16, but this is not tuned to my hearing loss. This is just gets the sound source closer to my ear. A hearing aid has that DSP. That instrument is tuned to your hearing loss. So when you use that for hearing assistance, you're using something that's personalized device to them, and they have a much better experience than they do with other technologies.
Yeah, we've definitely, as an audio guy, I've heard from people that use hearing aids that, hey, it sounds much better over at this facility. Can you guys take a look at your hearing loop? And I've been in that situation, so I dive into it and I do a little EQ to it, and because whatever audio signal you send to it, you can also process.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
that's a whole nother subject.
Subject.
Yeah,
time
what
delay
to send
and all
and
that
how.
stuff.
Some people pay more attention to it than others, but
yeah,
I always recommend if you're just going to put a loop in and you don't want to, obviously we're not going to ask people to mix separately for that. That's
right.
a little extreme, but I just tell people the signal you send from your console to your loop amplifier, just put it on something you're already monitoring.
Right.
So if you're doing a record feed, it's really the same thing. It's a closed environment you're mixing for. So if you just take your same record feed that you're sending out for recording or live streaming and you stick that into your loop amplifier, you're probably going to be okay.
Point being, though, is those people do know when there is good sound in their hearing aid and when there isn't.
Oh, and they will tell you.
Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely. And all we're trying to really do through this is provide a better experience for everybody. We're trying to cater to that particular audience, just like we are when we put in a new sound system, right? We're catering so that it's great sound for everybody in the room. But then there's that population, that group of people that can't hear that. And we want to provide a great experience for them as well.
There's a lot out there. And we're becoming them.
Yeah.
You guys are. Yeah.
I got these grays coming in, man.
Thanks for being the old guy to talk about hearing loops.
Yeah.
That's what I'm here for.